Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Resident Evil Episode 1. It is called Welcome to New Raccoon City and this is the new Netflix show. I'll start spoiler free because it is in Episode 1 and I'll give you a warning before I go into spoilers. This is of course based on the video game series, kind of, loosely. And I suppose the first thing I should mention here, just for the context and my my viewpoint getting into this, is that I am a fan of the games. Like I grew up playing the games. It's my favorite video game series, particularly the classic games and the old style. Although it's kind of returned to a little bit of that in recent times. So I'm a big fan of the games. Love the games, love how the games make me feel, and I'm bringing that, obviously, that point of view into this. Although right from the get-go, when they announced this show, it didn't sound like it was going to be anything like the games. It sounded like a big departure, and it was going to be like, oh, a new take, or something that's kind of tangentially related to Resident Evil, but isn't necessarily directly an adaptation. It's something very different, which at this point is not surprising. The original movie series, which I hated pretty much through and through, sort of stopped trying to be like the games at all after the first couple, and those weren't good either. Those were really trashy movies, but then it moved very far away and just would use the odd name from the games or the odd monster from the games, but by and large it was just doing its own weird wacky post-apocalyptic stuff at that point. Because what's funny is that none of the games are actually post-apocalyptic. The movies and this TV show go well into that territory, but the games don't actually do that. It's never been their thing. So I'm coming at this from two angles. I'm coming at this from one, just does it work as a TV show on its own right? Is it entertaining? Does it have qualities that make it worth watching? But then I'll also look at it as a Resident Evil fan and like how does it kind of like complement that or potentially piss me off because of that, So I'll try and look at it from both ways and sort of try and get to the bottom of it. The premise of this show is that it's got two timelines. It's got one timeline in the future in 2036 or something like that, which is the post-apocalypse, and we follow Jade, who is Wesker's daughter. Albert Wesker, of course, is the one character, at least from the first episode anyway. I mean, I don't know if there's more later, but he's the one character from the games, and he's very different than he is from the games. Lance Reddick plays him in the show, which I love Lance Reddick. He's a great actor. I enjoy him in The Wire. I enjoyed him on Lost and Fringe. Like he's been in tons of things that I've liked. The character is very different from the character in the games. And I'm not talking about the fact that he's a different race. Like I don't give a shit about that. But character personality wise and the way he is, the fact that he's a father with two kids and that he's at least trying to pretend to them that he's a nice sort of working dad or whatever he is, Wesker was he did have a history of doing some of the scientist stuff in the games, but of course he was also the undercover, or not undercover, but like he was the leader of STARS, which was this police squad, and he was secretly working for Umbrella, so he was a very much action and tactical guy as well, on top of doing lab stuff, whereas in the show, at least so far, he just seems like a scientist at Umbrella. He feels like he could be a William Birkin even instead of Albert Wesker. But right from the first time I read about this show, the synopsis they gave out, that kind of, it sounded like, okay, this is not the Wesker from the games. This is just someone with that name, and we're doing different things. We may get Easter eggs and references to the games, but it's kind of just going to be its own thing. So yeah, two timelines. One's in the future. It's the daughter of Wesker grown up in a very 28 Days Later style post-apocalyptic London or just UK as a whole. But the present day of the show is New Raccoon City, which is a second version of Raccoon City that's in South Africa that Wesker's moved his two teen daughters to with him. And it's them going to school, and it's them sort of like how the outbreak starts. I was all confused early on as if, like, is the reason why there is a new Raccoon City, is that because the zombie outbreak in the games that happens in Raccoon City already happened? It doesn't sound like it does, though. By the end of the episode, I was pretty convinced that, well, there seems to be secret outbreaks happening that they're trying to contain in different parts of the world. I think Tijuana is the one they say in the episode. It sounds like the public don't know that there's a potential zombie outbreak yet, or that there's Umbrella's doing this really shady stuff. It sounds like everything's still hush hush, and we're really rewriting how the zombie outbreak starts. in the show versus what happens in the games, which is, whatever, fine, right? I can roll with all that. But that is the general premise. It's jumping back and forth between these two timelines, and a lot of the 2022 timeline is teenage Jade with her sister Billy, and kind of how Billy's got troubles at school. She gets bullied, and she's got a history of having kind of of acting out and kind of defending herself in a sense. So that's the premise of the show. But obviously there's stuff going on at the Umbrella Lab, which comes into it, and in the future there's zombies and there's monsters and everything else. So is it any good, right? That's the big question to start off with. The short answer is not really. It's not like the worst thing ever. Like, it's not terrible. It's not as like trashy and laughably bad as like some of the movies are, but it's just kind of dull and generic most of the time. A lot of the stuff in 2022 with the teenage sisters is just really kind of like poorly written teenage drama. There's a scene where Billy's at school and this girl comes to sit next to her when she's on her own in the cafeteria, and it turns into she's kind of a bully and she's going to like pick on Billy. That scene is maybe the worst scene in the whole episode. It is so weirdly paced, and the way that because it kind of makes you think the bully might actually be another like shy girl, but then she's just really awful to her. She picks on the fact that she's a vegan. She kind of like rubs it in. She calls her a freak. It kind of escalates really absurdly in this really over the top way that kids can be awful, they can, but this just felt really unnatural, the way it just like, she's like a supervillain, right? She should be the daughter of Albert Wesker, the way she's talking. And all of it's got a purpose, which is ultimately that they're going to see like how Wesker deals with a situation like this, and how he is kind of, maybe he's like a scary higher up in the company, because everyone in this town works for Umbrella. It's Umbrella's kind of town. In fact, at one point you get an aerial shot of the town and it's actually in the shape of the Umbrella logo. Whatever, it's a bit on the nose, but sure. So all the flashback stuff with the sisters is kind of tedious. It kind of drags out. This episode is a full hour long, and I would say that it wouldn't fix everything, but one of the things that would probably help the episode a lot is that the plot that it's got is probably more suited to about a 41-minute network TV show, and I would say the tone and quality of the writing feels like a network TV show. If you took out the random F-bombs that are kind of scattered throughout it, it could be a CW show. Like, that's kind of what it feels like. It feels like Resident Evil. Well, no, it doesn't even feel like Resident Evil, the CW show. It feels like a zombie CW show. And the reason why I say that is because there's very little in this that really makes it feel like Resident Evil. I have heard that later episodes have more Easter eggs and more references, but other than the fact that it's called New Raccoon City, there's a character called Wesker, and at one point someone says the T-virus, there really isn't a lot in this that feels very Resident Evil. Looking at it as a Resident Evil fan, I would say it's extremely underwhelming and just kind of, I don't want to say insulting, but just kind of like, well, what was the point? You're just using the name. This resembles nothing of what I know of the games. And even if you're going to have, and I'm sure there's going to be monsters from the games other than zombies as the show goes on. There's technically one in this episode actually, but that's not like that big a deal though. And versus like, it's really wild to me that none of the movies have really tried to create what I feel like Resident Evil is to me. Because Resident Evil is very inspired by aliens, and the whole idea of Resident Evil is that it's a character or a group of characters trapped in a location, all set in one night, trying to get out of a mansion, a police station, maybe the whole city, during a zombie outbreak, and it's all about solving puzzles, solving problems, and just getting out alive. But it's always all the games are all pretty much set in one night. When Resident Evil starts globetrotting or whatever, it starts to, that's where it starts to feel a bit weird to me, because it starts to feel like it's just a different thing now. And it's something that a lot of and it's not post-apocalyptic either, right? For some reason, a lot of the movies and this TV show are going the post-apocalyptic route, and none of Resident Evil in the games is post-apocalyptic. None of it feels that way at all. It's always just an outbreak in a specific area or a specific city or a specific building even, and in a lot of the cases. So, none of it feels very Resident Evil to me, and I would argue that a lot of the adaptations have not felt remotely Resident Evil to me. This feels like it's going more for like a 28 Days Later meet CW show kind of thing. Like that's, and even the way that the outbreak seemingly is going to start is very 28 Days Later. So yeah, as a Resident Evil fan, it's just completely far removed. Although after I watched the episode, but before I started the review, I did see a photo someone took of a later episode, presumably showing a younger version of Wesker, Albert Wesker, and it was a funny image. Like I got a chuckle, but it does imply that they are going to try and throw in these Easter eggs and references to things that, you know, the idea that maybe Albert Wesker used to be like more like the Albert Wesker that's in the games. Let's just say it was a photo of Lance Reddick wearing some sunglasses. Which he obviously doesn't have in this episode. So you know, maybe that's is that a spoiler to say Lance Reddick's going to wear some sunglasses at some point? I don't I don't think it is, but yes, apologies if you feel that was spoiling too much. And then the actual post-apocalyptic stuff, I think it feels really undercooked in this episode. One of the things that you should do when you have like two timelines, and this is something, you know, I'll show that Lance Reddick was on Lost, would have this flashback formula where every episode would focus on a particular character and it would flash back to that character. But one of the things that a show like that does, or anything does when you have multiple timelines, is that they should thematically feel relevant to each other in some way. And I never really felt like in this episode it did. It kind of felt like whenever it cut to the other plot, it just kind of did it because, oh, it's, you know, like we only have so much of this future plot, maybe because it costs more to make, so we only have, there's not really a whole lot of plot in the future, like apocalypse stuff in this episode. It's actually really quite simple when you stop and break it down. It's effectively something happens to a character, then they wake up, and then second thing happens to character, and that's basically it. That you know, that's me summing up that entire future plot. And it kind of, you know, that's where you get a lot of the big set piece moments. You know, there's a big monster early on in the episode in the post-apocalyptic side of things. It's not a monster from the games. I thought it was their take on the Gravedigger at first. But then you kind of see it walking about on its back legs, and I was like, nah, it's not really the Gravedigger. It's just kind of its own random thing. This show is guilty of something which is wild to me because it's a Resident Evil show. But they're not calling them zombies, at least not yet. All we hear them be called in this episode is zeros, because they're all patient zeros, I guess, or something. I don't know why. But they say it a few times. They call them zeros a few times, and I'm like, why are you calling them zeros? What is this weird fascination with zombie shows not wanting to call zombies zombies? The walkers, at least walkers, like I think work better in the context of like The Walking Dead. Like it kind of worked, and it was kind of baked out of the name of the show, and you know, I understood it to some extent. Zeros here makes no sense. I just do not get it at all. It sounds terrible. It just made me roll my eyes when they started using it. And the CG's kind of hit and miss. Like it's all right sometimes, but then there's a lot of times where certain creatures just don't look that good. The kid stuff, and like Wesker feeling like he's an absent father and he's trying to be a better dad, like all that's just it's a little bit weird as a Resident Evil fan. Removing that from the equation and just sort of looking at it as like a teen drama show, it's just kind of miserable. So much of that early stuff, because if anything, what you'd want to do in your backstory and your present day stuff, where you know the sisters are together and they've got like, you know, the high school life, and they're complaining that they've had to move to this new city and they don't like it very much. Like that's fine, but you would think that the whole point would be the contrast. Like you say, oh, this was happy life before things went bad. It's, or at least at the start of the flashbacks, where it's, you know, before the outbreak happens. Like this is the happy life they lost, and this is what the world has lost. But instead, it's very miserable because so much of it is Billy, the younger sister, or they're not even younger. They're technically twins, as she explains in the episode. But she feels like the younger one because Jade acts like the older sister. She repeatedly in the episode is upset or embarrassed or feels picked on or bullied or whatever. And so much of this flashback story is Jade trying to say, no, you've got me and you're great and you're smart, and it's so much of it's trying to like basically try to make her feel better. And it all just is miserable. It's like a really miserable, depressing plot where there's no joy or happiness. And this isn't even the post-apocalyptic part with all the zombies and monsters, everyone trying to be eaten and like double crossing and stuff. This is the part of the show that's just normal life, and it's maybe the bubbly high school part, and instead it's just this miserable story of bullying and neglect and all these other things. There's very little joy to find in this, and I do think you should have some joy in a Resident Evil. Like, Resident Evil, by and large, is fun. Like, it isn't, as much as I think the older movies are really trashy and shit, and like they don't have any of the charm of the games. Like, it's supposed to be a fun feeling of surviving, right? It's supposed to be fun, and there's cheesy elements to the games. There's tons of cheesy elements to the games. And I'm not saying you have to do those exact cheesy elements, but this is just the complete opposite of it. It's just miserable, and it's taking itself seriously. There's not an ounce of humor or joy or just, you know, you're never endeared to the characters. You never really grow to like the characters because there's very little about them that is pleasant. Like Jade, from the first second we see her of her in the episode when they're driving into their new home in a new town, she is just complaining. She doesn't want to be there, and that's one thing. That's a pretty normal thing for a teen character to do. But then it keeps going, and she's rude to everyone she talks to. The woman who's there to like show them around the house and welcome to the neighborhood, like she immediately starts like dropping these like teen zingers at her, and it's, you know, it's very rude and awkward. And it's not like, oh, she's being sly and putting in like a little like wry comment that she won't understand. No, like this woman gets that she's in an awkward situation and she's being confrontational with her. Billy is nicer as a character. She's far more like she wants to be nice to everyone. She tries not to be aggressive, but fundamentally then she just gets picked on, and it's almost kind of like the show is like, hey, the one who is nice to everyone is the one who gets bullied and picked on and has a rough time, and she's weak and stuff. And the other character is the tough one, and she's the one who's going to get her through it, so she should listen to her. But so much of it is just kind of miserable. It's a miserable plot line that doesn't make you like the characters before anything bad happens to them. So you kind of feel indifferent when stuff does happen to them. I mean, obviously Lance Reddick's a good actor. You know, he's you know, he's solid, and he's there. He's being Lance Reddick, and he's got presence as he always does. It's good. It doesn't save the teen like sister drama stuff of the episode. Some stupid choices are made as well, might I add. Characters make some dumb choices, which is not unusual for a plot in a zombie show or a post-apocalyptic setting. Like, that happens just so that we can have the drama from it. But there is some particularly dumb decisions made. Umbrella as a company, like, it's interesting seeing them function and being this like conglomerate that does a bit of everything, and they're clearly up to shady stuff like all the time. It's a little bit weird that their let's just say their security is a bit laxed in this first episode. So it's shockingly easy to break into an Umbrella lab. I'll just say that before we get into spoilers. Yeah, so I'll give a spoiler warning so I can just talk about a couple of things that happen towards the end, and a couple of, you know, twists and turns. In the flashback part of the episode, we have the girls breaking into the Umbrella lab because whilst Billy's there to see her father, she notices they've got some like bunnies and stuff in cages, and Umbrella aren't supposed to be doing animal testing. PETA gave them a ward apparently, so they break in, and it turns out to get into Umbrella all you need is voice activation. So they just play a recording of their dad saying his name, which I guess is kind of a callback to the games. It's a weird callback, but in Resident Evil 3 there is a moment where you get into an elevator because you play the tape back of a doctor saying his name. But that's like like, it's a pretty tenuous link, but I mean, whatever, it's fine. But they go in, and the dumb choice is, this is very 28 days later, and I don't know if this is the start of the outbreak per se, or if it's just something that happens before the outbreak, but we get to see a zombie dog. We get to see one of the zombie dogs from the games. The CG's a bit rough, but basically Billy just lets it out of a cage because she's wanting to help the animals. And then, of course, it's this dangerous zombie dog, and she gets bit, and that's kind of, you know, where we end that episode. There's a lot of them running around the lab, trying to get away from it at the end. Yeah, just some dumb choices. It kind of telegraphs the idea that she's vegan. Like, it really hits you home with that a lot throughout the episode. So it's kind of setting up that this is maybe how things are going to start. Everything else with the character being bullied by this girl in school for like several scenes that are kind of tedious to get through. The bully's not a particularly good actress, I don't think. All that basically builds up to where Wesker comes in for like a parent teacher meeting with the other like kid's parent, and basically stares him down and says, "I'm Albert Wesker. You're just like a tech analyst. Anyone can do your job. No one can do my job." And he basically just like does a big dick measuring contest right there in front of the principal, and it is kind of hinted at that like this surprises Billy, because when she's telling her sister later, like, yeah, like our dad who wears socks to the beach and has the same password for everything, which is also set up for later when they use his password to get into a computer. That was a bit clunky. It's a bit like, I'm fine with them saying, "Oh, he uses the same password for everything," so it's not that big a like. If they just said that as they went to actually do it, like if she just typed it in and went, "Huh, he uses the same password for everything." Although, what is it? The password, for some reason, the password wasn't starred out. Like, she types in Spock21, which was the password he uses for everything, but it's like visible. And I know that sometimes you can turn it on so that you can see the password, but by default, everything password related is usually starred out. Like, that's usually just how it works. So that felt a bit odd to me, particularly that this is a computer in a big corporation, a lab that does secret shady stuff. Like, it feels weird that it's like, oh, the passwords are just on show. Very odd. But yeah, that was the flashback stuff. It wasn't very captivating. Like I said, this is a full hour-long episode, and it felt like it was kind of dragging through some of the plot. And that's not a Resident Evil problem specifically. That is a Netflix show problem. I would say the majority of things that I see from Netflix now have this pacing problem, where they just feel just stretched out to sort of be, hey, we're a prestige show because our episodes are a full hour. But you're like, no, your episode would be better. It wouldn't solve all the problems in this by any means, but your episode would be a lot better if you were just 40 minutes instead. You really would solve some issues with that. The future stuff is basically just that Jade gets cut when she's studying the zombies, because in the future she studies the zeros, as she calls them, to try and see how the virus is mutating, if at all. But she gets cut, so they smell the blood, they run after her. A giant monster comes out after she's burned all the zombies with her like perimeter defense system, and it's it's this big monster, but some guys show up and shoot it right before it kills her, and she wakes up in their base, and these are a bunch of just like scavengers who are surviving in the apocalypse, because it sounds like there are parts of the world that are still okay, because she like does like a Skype call to her husband and daughter at one point, and it's like, oh, they're in a normal house doing normal things. But they turn on her, these guys. They do some backstory stuff where they explain who they are, but ultimately Umbrella wants her. Like, she's like hiding from Umbrella, so they have turned her in. Umbrella's on their way, but surprise, surprise, the Umbrella guy, when he shows up, just has these guys shoot everyone as soon as they get there, and they're after her. And the big twist of the episode is that right after we've seen Billy be bit by the zombie dog, and the flashback stuff, he says, "Your sister's been looking for you, Jade." So it implies that Billy's like a higher up at Umbrella or something now, and that she's not dead or a zombie from the zombie dog, even though that's what you would think was happening, because she looked like she was dying at the end of the flashback sequence. Obviously, I expected her to be a main character, so I'm not surprised she isn't. The episode just ends with Jade running away and jumping off this wall into what looks like a horde of zombies to get away from Umbrella, and it ends with her mid-jump. That's your cliffhanger. Yeah, nothing about this made me want to watch anymore. Honestly, like, I could sit and say, oh, it's not Resident Evil, it doesn't make me feel what I feel when I play Resident Evil, it's not doing plot things from Resident Evil. I could say all that, but the biggest problem, honestly, with this show is just that it's a bit of a slog and kind of boring. And it's very generic as well. It doesn't really bring anything exciting to the zombie genre. It could have really played up the idea of the mutations and the different monster types a bit more. I'm sure it does that throughout the show. I know there's going to be a licker because there's one on the poster. I think I saw it in the trailer as well. Clearly, there's going to be more of that as the show goes on, but the basis of the show, though, is just too dull and uninteresting and far too CW in its writing. It's CW with F-bombs, quite frankly, when we're dealing with the teens. That's a shame. That's a shame. because at least it could be an entertaining show on its own right, even if it's not going to be a proper Resident Evil show. But yeah, it's really weird as a Resident Evil fan of the games, because the name has just been like farmed out for so many projects now that barely resemble Resident Evil. That, you know, I mean, fair play, Capcom are making money, I suppose, and they're you know, using the brand to do whatever. But like, I didn't go in with the high hopes, because let's face it, I don't expect any adaptations of Resident Evil to be very good, just because the track record is pretty abysmal. But this is better than some of them, maybe even most of them, honestly, but it's still not good. And arguably, it's harder to watch because it's more dull and boring, because it's more in the middle territory as opposed to laughably bad like some of the other ones. So it really is just like there's nothing exciting or positive to say, sadly. But there you go. That's the Resident Evil pilot. If they're even technically a pilot, but you know what I mean. So let me know what you thought of the show in the comments. If you've seen more of it, feel free to you know, put spoiler warnings for others who might be watching the rest of it. But by all means, let me know in the comments what you think. You can like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All that stuff helps out a lot. And of course, if you want to support us financially, you can hit the super thanks button under the video, or you can go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us for as little as $1 per month and keep all the content coming. So thank you very much. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?